What if I told you that the very force you've been taught to suppress, that raw destructive energy coursing through your unconscious, is actually the key to your greatest creative transformation? The destroyer archetype that modern psychology fears, that society conditions you to repress, that you've spent years trying to eliminate from your personality, this is not your enemy. This is your most potent ally in the process of individuation, the very energy that can dismantle the false structures of your ego and rebuild you into who you were meant to become. But here's what they don't want you to understand. Every act of creation requires destruction. Every phoenix must first burn. Every breakthrough demands the breaking down of what came before. The destroyer within you isn't a pathological force to be medicated away or spiritually bypassed. It's an archetypal energy that, when properly channeled, becomes the sculptor's chisel, the surgeon's scalpel, the revolutionist's vision. You've been conditioned to fear this power because unconscious destruction is chaos, but conscious destruction, that is the foundation of all meaningful change. The moment you begin to understand the destroyer not as your shadow to be defeated, but as your ally to be integrated, everything changes. What if the very quality that makes you feel dangerous, unpredictable, or too intense is actually the raw material of your genius? What if your capacity for destruction, when channeled through consciousness rather than compulsion, becomes your capacity for creation? Most people don't realize they're living in a psychological prison built from their fear of their own destructive potential. They've been taught that to be spiritual, evolved, or psychologically healthy means to eliminate all aggressive impulses, to become perpetually peaceful, endlessly accommodating, and infinitely patient. This is not integration, this is amputation of half your psychic energy, and the cost is devastating. You see this everywhere: the nice person who secretly resents everyone around them, the spiritual seeker who becomes passive-aggressive when challenged, the professional who smiles through meetings while plotting revenge in their mind. They've tried to eliminate the destroyer instead of channeling it, and what they've created is not peace but internal warfare. The destroyer, denied conscious expression, goes underground and begins to destroy from within us relationships, self-esteem, health, purpose. The symptoms are unmistakable once you know what to look for. There's the chronic people-pleasing that leaves you feeling empty and resentful. The inability to set boundaries that matter, because setting boundaries requires the capacity to say no, to end things, to destroy what isn't serving you. There's the creative paralysis that comes from being unable to edit, unable to kill your darlings, unable to destroy the mediocre in service of the excellent. Perhaps most tragically, there's the spiritual bypassing. The belief that enlightenment means never feeling anger, never wanting to tear down systems that oppress you, never experiencing the holy rage that calls injustice by its name. These people become psychological zombies, the walking wounded who've traded their power for the illusion of peace. The hidden costs compound exponentially. When you refuse to consciously wield your destroyer energy, you lose access to your healthy aggression, the force that protects your boundaries, defends your values, and fights for what matters. You become unable to end toxic relationships because ending requires destruction. You can't pivot careers because pivoting means destroying your previous identity. You can't evolve because evolution demands the death of who you used to be. The conventional approaches fail because they're based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology. They treat the destroyer as pathology rather than archetype. as enemy rather than energy. Traditional therapy often focuses on managing destructive impulses rather than transforming them. Self-help culture promotes endless positivity while demonizing the darker emotions. Even spiritual traditions often preach transcendence of aggression rather than integration of its power. But here's what the research in-depth psychology reveals, what my decades of work with the human psyche has confirmed. 5 proven ways to channel destroyer energy that transforms destruction into creation, chaos into order, rage into purpose. These aren't techniques for suppressing your darker nature, they're methods for alchemical transformation, for turning lead into gold, for harnessing the very energy that most people fear. You'll discover how the most successful individuals in every field have learned to consciously direct their destructive capacity toward obstacles, outdated systems, and limiting beliefs, rather than toward themselves or others. You'll understand the neurological mechanisms that make this transformation possible, and why those who master this integration often report feeling more authentically powerful than they ever imagined possible. The scientific backing comes from decades of research in Jungian psychology, neuroplasticity studies, and the emerging field of post-traumatic growth. Elite performers, from entrepreneurs to artists to activists, have long understood what most people miss. Destruction and creation are two faces of the same cosmic force. You'll never relate to your anger, your intensity, or your capacity for change the same way again. What most people miss about the destroyer archetype is that it's not fundamentally about violence or aggression, it's about transformation. Think of it this way, a controlled demolition that brings down an old building to make space for a new skyscraper is pure destroyer energy in service of creation. A surgeon who cuts through skin to heal what's beneath is wielding the destroyer as heal. A forest fire that clears dead wood so new growth can emerge is destruction as renewal. But here's what most people miss: the destroyer operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the physical level, it's your immune system destroying pathogens to preserve health. On the psychological level, it's your capacity to end toxic relationships, destructive thought patterns, and self-sabotaging behaviors. On the spiritual level, it's the ego death that precedes spiritual rebirth, the dark night of the soul that clears space for authentic awakening. Consider the master chef who tastes a dish and immediately knows what must be removed, what flavors need to be eliminated to allow the essential taste to emerge. This is destroyer consciousness, the discriminating awareness that knows what serves the whole and what must be cut away. It's the editor who can kill beautiful sentences that don't serve the story, the musician who can eliminate perfect notes that don't serve. The neurological research reveals something fascinating. The same brain networks involved in creative breakthrough are activated during healthy destruction. When you consciously choose to end something that no longer serves you, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways for innovation. The moment you destroy an outdated belief about yourself, you create neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to form new connections. But when this energy operates unconsciously, it becomes genuinely destructive. Think about a time when you were so frustrated with a situation that you wanted to burn it all down. Your job, your relationship, your entire life. That rage, that urge toward total destruction, contains enormous energy. The question isn't whether you have this energy, you do. The question is whether you'll direct it consciously or let it direct you. The conventional approach says suppress that energy, meditate it away, think positive thoughts until it disappears. But that's like trying to stop a river by building a dam. Eventually, the pressure builds until something breaks catastrophically. The conscious approach is different. Channel the river, build turbines, harness the power for useful work. Think about a time when you finally ended a relationship that was slowly killing you, when you quit a job that was crushing your soul, when you stopped believing a lie about yourself that had limited you for years. Remember that moment of destruction, how it felt scary and exhilarating simultaneously. That was your destroyer energy operating consciously, clearing space for something better to emerge. The internal psychological transformation required to channel destroyer energy begins with a fundamental shift in how you understand the nature of spiritual development. Most people believe that becoming more conscious means becoming more peaceful, more accommodating, more nice. This is a dangerous misconception that keeps you spiritually immature. True spiritual development requires what I call holy discernment, the capacity to distinguish between what serves your highest good and what doesn't, and the strength to act on that distinction. This means developing a relationship with your inner warrior, not the berserker who destroys indiscriminately, but the sacred warrior who destroys only what blocks the path to truth. The psychological mechanism behind this shift involves what neuroscientists call cognitive reappraisal, literally rewiring how your brain interprets emotional experiences. When you feel that surge of destructive energy, instead of judging it as bad or wrong, you learn to ask, what is this energy trying to protect? What needs to be cleared away? What is being called to die, so something new can be born? This requires rebuilding your relationship with intensity itself. Most people have been programmed to believe that intense emotions are dangerous, that good people are always calm and controlled. But intensity is simply concentrated life force. When you learn to stay present with intensity, instead of dissociating from it or acting it out unconsciously, you gain access to tremendous power. The mental blocks that prevent this transformation are predictable and systematic. There's the good person complex, the belief that spiritual people never feel destructive impulses. There's the perfectionist trap, the fear that making conscious changes means admitting you were wrong before. There's the safety addiction, the unconscious preference for familiar misery over unfamiliar growth. But here's what changes everything. When you realize that your resistance to wielding destroyer energy is often just fear of your own power, the dynamic shifts completely. You're not afraid of becoming destructive, you're afraid of becoming effective. You're not afraid of hurting others. You're afraid of disappointing them by becoming who you really are, instead of who they want you to be. The specific practice that elite performers across every domain have mastered is what I call conscious deconstruction, the systematic analysis and dismantling of beliefs, relationships, and systems that no longer serve growth. This isn't random destruction or emotional reactivity. This is strategic, intentional clearing of psychological space. The research in cognitive behavioral therapy confirms what depth psychology has long understood. Our thoughts create our reality, but most people never examine the foundational beliefs that generate their thoughts. Elite performers have learned to regularly audit their belief systems, identifying and destroying limiting assumptions with the same precision a master gardener uses to prune a prize rose. Neuroscientist Dr. Joe Dispenza's research on neuroplasticity reveals that to create new neural pathways, you must first interrupt the old ones. This is pure destroyer energy in service of transformation. The brain that got you to where you are is not the brain that will take you where you want to go. Conscious destruction of outdated neural patterns is essential for evolution. The step-by-step implementation begins with what I call the daily destruction practice. Each morning, spend 10 minutes identifying one belief, one behavior, one relationship dynamic that served you in the past but limits you in the present. Don't try to change it immediately. Simply identify it and consciously choose to begin the process of ending your investment in that pattern. The second step is learning to distinguish between destructive urges that serve growth and those that serve ego. Growth-serving destruction feels scary but clean. There's a sense of rightness beneath the fear. Ego-serving destruction feels chaotic, reactive, driven by hurt or revenge. The former clears space for something better. The latter simply creates more chaos. Third, practice what I call precision strikes, small targeted destructions that create maximum positive change with minimum collateral damage. Instead of quitting your job in rage, destroy the belief that you have no options. Instead of ending your marriage in fury, destroy the communication patterns that prevent intimacy. The most common mistake people make is trying to destroy too much too quickly. They get excited about transformation and want to tear down their entire life overnight. This creates psychological shock and often leads to regression. The destroyer works best when wielded with surgical precision rather than nuclear force. Another critical error is trying to destroy externally what needs to be destroyed internally. You can't end your anger by destroying the things that trigger it. You must destroy the internal beliefs that make those triggers powerful. You can't create peace by eliminating all conflict from your environment. You must destroy the internal patterns that make conflict feel threatening. The immediate action steps begin tonight. Choose one limiting belief you've carried for years. Write it down. Now write its opposite. Tonight before sleep, spend 5 minutes consciously destroying your investment in the limiting belief. Visualize it dissolving, burning away, being consumed by the fires of transformation. This isn't positive thinking. This is conscious deconstruction of psychological patterns that no longer serve you. The systematic approach that creates consistent results is what I call the cyclical renewal process, a 4-phase system that mirrors the natural cycles of death and rebirth observed in all living systems. This isn't a linear progression but a spiral dance of continuous transformation. Phase 1 is assessment, deliberately an audit of your life structures, relationships, beliefs, and behaviors. Just as a farmer surveys their fields before planting, you must regularly survey your psychological landscape to identify what's thriving and what's dying. This requires developing what I call the destroyer's eye, the capacity to see clearly what is and what could be, without the filters of fear or sentimentality. The technical mechanism here involves what psychologists call metacognition. Thinking about thinking, you develop the observer self that can step back from your automatic patterns and assess their effectiveness. This isn't self-criticism, but rather the detached evaluation of a scientist studying their own psychological ecosystem. Phase 2 is conscious ending, the intentional completion of what no longer serves. This might mean ending toxic relationships, destructive thought patterns, or outdated versions of your identity. The key is conscious choice rather than unconscious drift. You become the author of your own endings rather than their victim. Phase 3 is sacred destruction, the actual dismantling process, where you systematically remove what you've identified as obstacles to your growth. This requires enormous courage because you're often destroying things that once served you, that feel familiar, that others expect you to maintain. But this is where your destroyer energy becomes sacred. It's destruction in service of something higher. Phase 4 is creative reconstruction, the building of new structures, beliefs, and patterns in the space that's been cleared. This is where destruction reveals its true purpose, not ending for the sake of ending, but ending for the sake of beginning. The destroyer and creator are revealed as partners in the dance of transformation. The before scenario looks like a person trapped in patterns they hate but feel powerless to change. They complain about their circumstances, but take no action to alter them. They fantasize about different lives, but never destroy the beliefs that keep them trapped in their current one. They live in a kind of psychological purgatory, too afraid to stay the same, too afraid to change. The after scenario reveals someone who wields their destroyer energy like a master craftsman, wields a chisel with precision, purpose, and reverence for what's being created. They end toxic relationships, not from reactivity, but from clarity. They change careers, not from desperation, but from vision. They transform limiting beliefs, not from self-hatred, but from self-love. The sabotage patterns are predictable and must be addressed systematically. There's the guilt sabotage, feeling guilty for destroying what others want you to maintain, even when it's clearly not serving you. There's the perfectionist sabotage, waiting for the perfect moment to make changes, which never comes. There's the regression sabotage, returning to old patterns when transformation gets uncomfortable. The antidote to sabotage is understanding that conscious destruction is actually an act of creation, that ending what doesn't serve is how you make space for what does serve, that your commitment to growth sometimes requires disappointing people who prefer you to stay small. The tangible action that creates immediate engagement and lasting results is what I call environmental destruction, the physical clearing of space that mirrors and facilitates psychological clearing. This works because the external and internal worlds are intimately connected. When you change your physical environment, you literally reprogram your subconscious mind. Begin with your physical space. Choose one room, one closet, one drawer that contains items from a version of yourself you're ready to outgrow. This might be clothes from when you believed you had to dress a certain way to be accepted, books from when you thought differently about yourself, memorabilia from relationships or phases of life that no longer reflect who you're becoming. The power of physical action over purely mental approaches lies in what psychologists call embodied cognition, the reality that our thoughts and emotions are influenced by our physical experiences. When you physically remove items that represent limiting beliefs, you're sending a powerful message to your unconscious mind that change is not just possible but actual. The multiple implementation options give you flexibility to match this practice to your specific situation and comfort level. Option 1 is gradual release. Misty. Each day, remove 3 items that represent who you used to be. Option 2 is seasonal purging. 4 times a year, completely clear and reorganize one area of your living space. Option 3 is crisis clearing. When you feel stuck or stagnant, immediately clear your most personal space completely and redesign it to reflect who you're becoming. Historical validation comes from traditions around the world that understood the power of conscious destruction. The Hindu festival of Holi celebrates the burning of evil spirits and negative energies. Buddhist sand mandalas are destroyed upon completion to represent the impermanence of all forms. Native American vision quests often involve the deliberate destruction of aspects of tribal identity to allow individual spiritual identity to emerge. The immediate engagement comes from choosing one physical item right now that represents a limitation you're ready to release. This might be a piece of clothing that makes you feel less than beautiful, a book that reinforces limiting beliefs about yourself, a gift from someone whose opinion you value more than your own truth. The item itself isn't important. The conscious choice to release it is everything. Create momentum by understanding that every conscious destruction creates energy for conscious creation. When you remove what doesn't serve you, you literally create space, massive physical, mental, and emotional space for what does serve you. This isn't loss but liberation. You're not becoming less but becoming more yourself. The key to building momentum is starting small but being consistent. One conscious destruction daily, whether it's a physical item, a limiting thought, or a behavioral pattern, creates a rhythm of renewal that compounds over time. Your capacity for conscious change grows with practice, like any other skill. The psychological aspects of successful implementation center around a fundamental identity transformation that must occur for these practices to become sustainable rather than temporary. You must shift from identifying as someone who things happen to someone who consciously chooses what continues and what ends in your life. This requires moving from victim consciousness to creator consciousness, understanding that you are not at the mercy of your circumstances, your emotions, or your history. You are the conscious agent of your own transformation, and wielding destroyer energy consciously is one of your most powerful tools for self-creation. The certainty that makes this transformation inevitable comes from understanding that you've already been using destroyer energy your entire life. You've simply been using it unconsciously. Every time you've ended a relationship, changed jobs, moved locations, or changed your mind about something important, you've wielded destroyer energy. The difference now is bringing consciousness to what you've always been doing. Previous attempts at change may have failed, not because you lacked willpower or commitment, but because you tried to create new things without first destroying the internal structures that were incompatible with those new things. You can't build a skyscraper on a foundation designed for a cottage. Conscious destruction clears the ground for authentic creation. When you begin practicing these 5 ways of channeling destroyer energy, you're not becoming someone different, you're becoming who you really are, beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and false accommodation. You're not learning new skills so much as remembering ancient ones, not developing capacities so much as accessing what was always there. The implementation becomes inevitable when you realize that not changing is actually more uncomfortable than changing. Staying stuck in patterns that don't serve you requires enormous energy. Living according to other people's expectations instead of your own truth is exhausting. Maintaining beliefs about yourself that you've outgrown is psychologically painful. Conscious destruction is actually the path of least resistance once you understand that resistance to change is what creates suffering. This brings us full circle to where we began. Midas with the revolutionary understanding that your capacity for destruction is actually your capacity for creation, that your intensity is your power, that your willingness to end what doesn't serve you is how you make space for what does. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are powerful and in need of conscious direction. The destroyer within you is not your enemy, but your ally, not your weakness, but your strength, not your problem, but your solution. When you learn to channel this energy consciously rather than suppress it unconsciously, you join the ranks of those who shape reality rather than merely react to it. Your transformation begins the moment you choose to see your destructive impulses not as evidence of your spiritual failure, but as raw material for your spiritual success. Comment below with one thing you're ready to consciously destroy in service of who you're becoming. Your willingness to be specific and public with your commitment activates the energy of transformation and invites the support of others walking the same path. The old you, the one who feared your own power, who apologized for your intensity, who tried to be nice instead of real, that version of yourself can rest now. The new you, the one who wields destroyer energy like the sacred tool it is, who creates through conscious ending, who transforms through conscious choice. This version of yourself is not coming someday. This version of yourself is here now, waiting for your recognition and activation. The only question remaining is not whether you have the power to consciously shape your reality through stretching and conscious creation. You do. The only question is whether you'll use it.